to yield 5 minutes to the gentleman, Mr. Massie.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Mr. App, can you talk to us about the linkage between literacy or high school graduation rates and juvenile delinquency or incarceration? Microphone.
I think there might be some correlation, but I have to say that literacy is not the most important thing when you're talking about violence reduction. What you're talking about are individuals who are deeply disconnected from education, deeply connected to the criminal justice system, and you need a sort of all hands on deck approach for those individuals. Literacy generally, of course, is extremely important, but it's not central to violence reduction.
How is education correlated, or why do they lose interest or become disconnected from the educational system?
This is a grand debate in violence reduction. When we talk about root causes, access to opportunity, poverty, inequality, other things like that, these are all correlated with rates of violent crime, and obviously they're connected. But in terms of what yields the most direct, measurable, and concrete outcomes in terms of saving lives this year, next year, the following year, you have to focus on where the problem is concentrated. And so, obviously, we need massive investments, I believe, in education, housing, literacy, and these other things. But they're not a substitute for the immediate interventions that we need right now.
Thank you. Mr. Lehman, can you speak to this topic? And is it just a correlation, or is there causation between lack of literacy or lack of high school diplomas, graduation, tied to incarceration rates or juvenile delinquency?
I can't, I think, make any stronger claims than Mr. Apt, although I agree with everything that he said. Certainly, the complexity of untangling, as you alluded to, there's a complexity to untangling root causes of propensity to offend or risk of offending. But he is right that those individuals who take up the overwhelming majority of criminal justice system's resources in terms of the frequency of their offending and severity of their offending, their primary problem is not just access to education, it's not just any one particular vector. So, I think certainly there's a correlation. I think that there are many other levers that one could pull other than education, even while saying that education is very important in general to society.
So according to the National Adult Literacy Survey, 70% of all incarcerated adults cannot read at a 4th grade level. I think there's probably more than just correlation. I think there's some causation there. If literacy corresponds to access to better jobs, to higher paying jobs, then obviously, income levels are tied to crime as well, and lack of opportunity, as you mentioned, is a factor. Mayor Turner, how long were your schools shut down during COVID?
They were shut down, I believe, starting in April of 2020 through the rest of that academic year. And I think in the following academic year, they reopened. We encouraged them all to reopen.
Do you think the lack of educational opportunity or the number of people who sort of tuned out maybe at the high school senior level or maybe at the 3rd grade level is going to have any effect on crime in your city?
Well, I tie education and opportunity together. And if people are falling behind and not getting what they need from an educational point of view, it certainly puts them at a disadvantage and reduces the number of opportunities that are made available, and it could lead to increased crime. I think the more people that receive the education, the better they will be, and I do think it is one of the deterrents to crime.
I think one of the worst policies that was adopted during the last 2 years in terms of trying to mitigate COVID was taking a set of our citizens, our kids, and depriving them of educational opportunities, in some cases for 2 years. This is going to have a long tail. This will affect crime. This is going to create a pandemic of lack of opportunity because these kids, a lot of them have dropped out. They're not going to be literate. They're going to be behind in every category, not just literacy, but basic math, basic civics. And I think it's a tragedy, and I think the people who caused this need to be called to answer, and they need to own up for what they've created and their contribution to crime in this country by depriving our kids of an education. And I yield back.
Sure.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Opp, you mentioned in your testimony that ATF